City, New Mexico on February 11th, 2014. I'm here with Gary Whipple.
Greg.
With Greg Whipple. Do you want to tell us your name?
Oh, yeah, Greg Whipple.
Greg Whipple, and do you know that you're being video recorded?
I do.
Okay. Can you tell us where you grew up?
Yeah, I was born in Seattle, and about 7 years old, we moved to Montana, a little town called Bynum. My dad bought a little 500-acre farm ranch combination, and we starved out there for a good many years. I went to high school in Shoto and went to the university at Missoula.
And when did you graduate from high school?
1957.
And when did you finish at the university?
Well, I never did get a degree. I was there for about 3 years off and on.
And when did you start smoke jumping?
1959.
And did you work before that with the Forest Service, or what kind of work did you do before then?
Well, yeah, I worked on farms and ranches and stuff around the Shoto Bynum area as a kid. And
Sorry.
Then went to work for the Forest Service in Shoto on the Lewis and Clark National Forest. I ended up working on a trail crew type thing and working the trails into Bob Marshall, and then finished out as a smoke chaser at Gates Park.
So that's the same country that Ivan Doig writes about in some of his novels.
It is actually that and up the front a ways up around Depuyer Creek and Swift Reservoir, Swift Dam, I don't know what they call it, which.
But do you recognize any of that country in his writing, or is it that definite?
Oh yeah. He of course gives everything different names, but that country has a certain lay to the terrain, and he used that, of course.
And you met him once?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I had a friend from Valier that was on the football team, and we went up to play a ball game, I guess it was, and this friend of mine was a fellow by the name of Glenn Collins, introduced me to I guess it was the senior guys that were on the football team, and went down the line introducing them, and he said, "This is Ivan," as it turned out, Doig, who was a nice guy, very quiet, kind of reserved, but just, you could tell he was just happy sort of fellow. He just kind of looked at everything with a kind of a bemusement, you know. I think Doig was so far ahead of the rest of us as far as maturity that he saw the humor in everything that we all took serious.
But he's from the same Scottish heritage that you are, or don't you share that?
Yeah, sure do, yeah.
Were there a lot of Scottish people up there in that country?
They were scattered around. Not a lot, but yeah, there were some.
Yeah. So when did you first hear about smoke jumpers?
When I was a smoke chaser at Gates Park, they sent in 4 jumpers to work there before the season got hot. And one was a guy by the name of Bill McLaughlin. Another one was a guy by the name of Dave Ponson. And I can't remember the other 2 guys. There was one guy from the deep south who had been in a seminary or something like that. They were going to make him a monk or something, and he was too much of a wild child for that. He ended up in the jumpers. And I can't remember who the 4th fellow was. But I know that Ponson and McLaughlin both made the Forest Service a career.
And did they talk you into it, or did you just get the idea?
They didn't. They weren't really recruiting, but they didn't have to. They were just stories they were talking about and this and that, and I think it was their first year jumping. And I think McLaughlin had fallen out of the tree and bruised the heck out of his ribs or something. I don't remember, but it was just sitting around in the evenings and talking to him and stuff. I thought, well, I've just got to give this a shot, you know.
So then what happened next year? You applied, or?
Well, yeah, the next year I applied, and I was going to the university, and I went down to the Federal building. I don't remember the details on how I found out that Leonard Kraut had an office in the Federal building, and he was working on the lists for guys for the newbies for the next year. And I went down there and I talked to him, and about every 3 days I'd go back and see him, you know. And of course the list was filled up. There wasn't any room for a guy with 1 year's experience in the Forest Service who had never even seen a forest fire. I never had. Anyway, then there was another fellow from Sunburst by the name of Wade Irwin, who was a friend of mine, and we both would go by and talk to old Leonard Kraut every chance we got. I just haunted his doorway, and finally I walked in there one day and he said, well, Whipple, he says, there's 2 guys that haven't showed up. He says, if you and your friend Irwin want them, the jobs are yours. And I said, hallelujah.
And again, what year, what spring was that?
That was 59.
59, okay, so you trained in 59.
Yep.
Do you remember anything about that training year?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Of course, you go into the unknown thing like that. You wonder if you can keep up with the masses and compete and so on. But it wasn't physically. It wasn't that bad at all. I was in good shape as a kid. You know, I was 20 years old. So it was a pretty big bunch of guys. I can't remember. It was around 50 to 60 of us new guys, I think, back then. And remember there was one fella in that group whose last name was Tweedy.
Hmm.
And I think he had a brother that had jumped or was jumping somewhere else. Maybe had come through Missoula, I'm not sure. But Tweedy, as it turned out, was underage. He lied about his age and got in there, and we were making our practice jumps, and he hit the side of a ridge and landed the wrong way into the ridge instead of across or whatever, and he bent his right foot back at the joint backwards and just ripped it out. And that thing, I mean, in a matter of seconds was huge, just swelled and turned blue. I mean, it was an ugly mess. Anyway, but then somehow I think in that ensuing aftermath of that, they found out he was not even supposed to be there age-wise. And he was gone. I remember that clearly. I remember my first practice jump in Upper Sherman back then, and I did a lousy roll. I think it was knees and nose type thing. And one of the guys, older guys that was training, came running over to me and he said, Whipple, that wasn't very good. He said, did that log laying there bother you? He says, that log did bother you, didn't it? And that's why you did that. I said, no, I said, I just didn't do it very good. And anyway, that same jump, Gene DeBruin and I were, I think, close in the same DC-3 load. And afterwards they gave a big critique. And Gene DeBruin was given accolades for having the most perfect exit out of the airplane and so on. So I remember that about Gene.
Do you
think about either my third or fourth jump, I was a middle guy on a 3-man stick out of the dub. And the first guy out instead of going away from the airplane, turned and came right back underneath me and took my air from my chute. My chute collapsed, and I fell into his canopy. And they told us to go spread eagles and everything when you went that. So I did, and I sank into that canopy, and I sank in, and I sank in, and all of a sudden I stopped, and then it just went boom. And it just pushed me back out, and I slid off the side and fell. And I looked up, and my chute's going, and all of a sudden it opened. It was interesting.
That's a good one.
That was pretty exciting, actually. It didn't exactly scare me, but I guess I really didn't have time to get scared, you know.
Well, that first year, did you have many fires in '59?
I got 7 practice jumps and 7 fire jumps. And my first fire jump, I remember it. I don't remember the other 6, but I remember the first one. And it was on that. I think the forest is gone now. It's some other name. I think it was the St. Joe over in Idaho, and it's not. I don't think that exists anymore. I think it's absorbed by another one. I jumped a 2-manner with a guy by the name of Tommy Oswald, and we went over there in a travel air. And Oswald went out first, and I went out the next pass around. And as luck has it, the first thing I'm doing is I'm aimed right at 2 big dead stags standing up there about 80 feet high, going right at them, and I'm trying to steer around them. And I got to the more lined up with the one on the left than on the right. So just as I got to it, I was right at the top of this big old snag. I just turned sideways and threw my hip into the tree, and it broke it right off. It snapped that tree off. Down, I was still, like I say, about 60 or 80 feet in the air. But I thought sure as hell I was going to hang up on those snags, and they were real spindly out on the end. I knew what was going to happen. My chute was going to break out of those things bigger than heck. But as it was, I was able to hit it and broke it with my hip and went right on by it. And then I ended up in those alders on the side of the hill, thick alder thicket, the kind that grow out like this on the hillside. What a time I had getting out of there, man.
Is that what was burning, the alder?
No, there was just up over the ridge, and on the other side was a lightning strike had hit a big old ponderosa, yellow pine. And so there was a little fire probably 60 or 80 feet long around it, and that ponderosa was up there like a volcano, the smoke coming out the top, where it had been blown out, and it was hollow inside. I remember we worked on that damn thing, trying to get it down, cutting a 4-foot ponderosa with a Pulaski was not good. We didn't have a crosscut, I don't think, as I recall. And I remember a observer plane flew over, and they threw us a message down and said, "We do not consider this fire controlled until you get that snag down."
That's funny.
We finally got that snag down on the hillside, and then we had to split it open because it was 30 feet long, I guess, and hollow all the way, and it was all fire on the inside of it. And man, that was a job splitting that big sucker open with Pulaskis. Chop, 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 chop.
It's a bad one.
Oh, that was miserable. I remember we got that fire, we got the line around the fire real quick, and then we knocked it all down, and we didn't have any trouble with that. It was just that snag. And we worked and worked on it. I remember at some point in the night, I was sitting there looking for fire or something, and I heard a noise, and I looked up, and here were these elk. They had come into the burn area, and were rolling around in the ashes, just happy as could be, crashing around and rolling back and forth. We got it out finally, and about the time we did, 2-pounders walked in. One of them was a little guy, and his name, young kid, his name was Jesse James, of all things. And the other guy, I don't remember what his name was, but he had a metal hard hat on. He was a big old, tall, slender, dark complected, maybe a Native American sort of fella. And he had, on the front of his metal hard hat, he had balls written on it. And he was a good guy. wild man, son of a gun.